All right, everybody. Today we're going to take a look at another Estwing product. This is a 13-inch Riggers Hatchet, or what I've always been known as I was growing up as a carpenter's hatchet. So stick with me, guys. We'll get a few basic measurements, and we'll put this thing through some tests and see how she performs. Okay, guys, real quick. So we're at 13 inches lengthwise across the head. Looking at 6.5 from the edge of the blade to the butt end of the hammer. And we are about 3 3/4 inch of a wide bit. All right, now then, obviously this isn't quite like your standard hatchet. This tool is made more for carpentry work and the like, and whereas a lot of hatchets and axes have the hammer pole in the back, this has an actual proper hammer head, which actually lends itself to being quite useful, and you don't have to worry so much about damaging this if you're like using it on nails or hitting something quite hard. This is actually designed to withstand it. Now, whereas you do lose the width that a normal hammer pole would have, but you're trading that in for a more robust hammer head on the back end of it. And this is all steel construction, has over molded rubber grip, which is very comfortable, good positive grip, and it has a lanyard hole in it. You either use that to hang the tool or put a lanyard in it. So with all that being said, let's take it over to the old tree there and start chopping into it and see how well she chops. All right, guys, here we go. She got a pretty good bite. Wow, I really smell the pine resin in this piece I'm cutting into. I think when we're done using this for a testing medium, we're going to come in here, cut out these pine knots here, and get some good fat wood out of that. Let's get you guys a little bit more close up here real quick. Oh yeah, that has got quite a bit of resin in it. Good stuff right there. All right, guys, this here's a pretty good candidate. It's drawn quite crooked, and it needs copiced out of here anyway. So we'll go ahead and get into it. Okay, let's move you guys. So I do believe it's going to want to fall towards you. So let me move you. Try to find a flat spot, see. All right, let's move you there. Now we'll come back here. A little bit of pressure on that thing. Come back on the back side, just above that. Timber. perfectly straight. Okay guys, we're going to make this our tent peg, which first thing we'll want to do, we're going to make us a 7-notch in here. That's good enough to hold a piece of paracord or whatever have you. And we'll come down here at the bottom and put a little bit of a point on this thing and help it drive in the ground. We don't have to swing too hard. This hatchet's fairly sharp. If I go too crazy on it, I'll end up taking too much off of it with each swing. Alright, that right there alone will do it. Don't need to go too crazy. Now we'll drive her into the ground. Okay, here we go. And she is in there. Alright guys, we're going to try something a little more difficult for splitting. This is a piece of red oak. So let's see if we can get this bad boy split. Almost. That is some tough wood. Okay guys, let's process this down a little bit more. If I can get a good spot to put that on. It worked, but it went that way. Let's try that. So Where do I rate this? Looking through the lens of bushcraft and survival, it scores high in my opinion. Its construction is very, very good. Pretty decent steel, and the method that they use is pretty simple and basic, but it does make a pretty good tool. The handle's very comfortable. That's pretty bad out here. Very, very little to no shock in this handle while I'm using it. Got good balance, good head balance, and there's just enough of a swell through here that you kind of get almost 3 different grips depending on what you're doing, and just enough room if you had to. You can get 2 hands on this, though it's a little awkward because it's your thumb and the cheek of your palm area for my big hands wants to kind of rub, so I'd have to go up just a touch higher, a little more awkward. But you got smaller hands, you're probably more comfortable. I do like the fact that I don't have to worry about really damaging the head on this for hammering. Where, like I said, I'm sacrificing some width and length that I would get from a standard hammer pole, but this is hardened to be able to withstand, hitting nails. If you had to, you can bust up some rocks. Here, I'll just, much as I don't want to take from the fire ring, but since no dents, no gouges. All right, now that could come in handy for shelter building, or if you're making a nice rock oven. You're wanting to shape some stone a little bit. I mean, that's as far as looking at it from survival. And wow, these naps are quite persistent. Like I said, through the lens of survival and bushcraft. Now it's got a nice wide bit, and typically what this type of bit is best at is shaping wood. You say you get a round and you have a length, whatever size, maybe you're making a somewhat of a log cabin kind of style shelter and you need a flat spot. That's what these are pretty good at, because you get a whole lot of level flat. See, there's no curve to this. So for planing down the length of wood to get a flat spot, this excels at that versus your more crescent shaped of your standard hatchet and axes. Now, they do a decent job at felling. However, do they fell as good as a proper woods axe that's made for, you got your crescent shaped bit? No, they don't cut quite as good as those, but this still does a very good job. And especially with the size of material you'll be working with, keeping in mind the size of the hatchet. And most time you should never have to worry about anything over 4-inch diameter, whether you're bushcrafting or surviving. So it's very adequate for that. And you get down to the smaller diameter stuff, there's almost virtually no difference between this and a more traditional hatchet or axe, because this is sharp enough. It's got just good enough perfect weight for the head. It's going to plow right through it, just right along with the other. The only time this thing is going to lag behind, you start getting into the more bigger diameter pieces of wood. But, and of course, I forgot to mention, we have a nail puller, which would come in handy if you happen to find an old abandoned building, old abandoned house, a barn, a shed out there in the middle of nowhere, and maybe you can pull some nails and steeples to help you in your survival situation. That's another. It's not necessary to have that, but it's just a nice little extra added bonus, But overall, I give it 2 thumbs up because it's just perfect for carry size. You go on like Amazon and find the larger carrying mask that will come with their camp axes. I do believe those will fit, or they may actually make a sheath for this, or if somebody can, or you can make a leather carrying sheath for it, or maybe you can belt carry it. or at least have some kind of protective mask on it so you can throw it in a pack. But your point being that if you choose to make this your primary hatchet / axe for your bug out kit, emergency kit, car kit, truck kit, whatever you want to put it in, I think you made a good choice, in my personal opinion. And I stand behind that statement based on decades of using these tools. I've had one of these in my hand since I was a young kid. They were pretty well popular back in the 80s and 90s, and they were bought, and they people had these for decades upon decades. Eventually the grandkids got them, and there's some cases I'm sure that if they take care of it, they can give it to their kids and maybe their grandkids if you properly maintain your tools and don't abuse them. So there's a lot to be said about that kind of quality. Is this the top rated hatchet axe in the world? No. There's a lot that's way more fancy, far more fancier materials that cost way more. But this guy here can still do the job and do it well. So that's why I'm saying yes to this, because it's got a pretty decent price. My own personal experience tells me that I can rely on this if my life is depended on this tool, and it's affordable. So it's all win-win. All right, that guys, we're running pretty long on this little video here, so thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in another video.